Some men mistake silence for weakness. A crowded after-party in the Hollywood Hills, 1992. A drunk former fighter spots a man holding court with producers across the room. He walks up, slaps the drink out of his hand, announces to everyone, "This guy is a fraud. I'll prove it right now." He throws a spinning kick at the man's head. It never lands. The man catches the leg midair, locks the ankle, twists. A sharp crack fills the silent room. Before the attacker hits the floor, his elbow is bent the wrong way. A second crack. Two guests vomit into their champagne. For seconds, that is all it took. The man who did this? Steven Seagal. He picked up a fresh drink and turned back to the producers like nothing happened. But what did Seagal do when the cameras finally showed up? If this story satisfies you, subscribe and like. Now let me take you back. Not far. Just a few hours before that spinning kick never landed. The man on the floor. His name was Danny Cordero. 31 years old. Former professional MMA fighter. And I say former because by 1992, Danny had not won a fight in 2 years. Not one. His record was decent once. 14 wins, 3 losses. Enough to get noticed. Enough to get a manager who whispered things like, "You've got the look, Danny. Hollywood is calling." And Danny believed him. Believe me, he wanted to believe him. So Danny moved to Los Angeles in the spring of 1990. Sold his car to make the deposit on a one-bedroom apartment in North Hollywood. Took meetings. Auditioned for action roles. He figured his body and his fighting record would open doors. Here is the thing. They did open doors. But only halfway. He got callbacks. He got second reads. He even got a small part in a straight-to-video movie where he played a henchman who dies in the first 10 minutes. But the big roles? Those went to other guys. Guys like Jean-Claude Van Damme. Guys like Dolph Lundgren. And most of all, guys like Steven Seagal. Now here is what burned Danny more than anything. Seagal was not a fighter. Not in Danny's mind. Danny had bled in cages. He had broken his hands on other men's skulls. He had earned his toughness the hard way. But Seagal? Seagal was an Aikido guy. A martial arts diplomat, Danny called him. All wrist locks and throws and fancy demonstrations that looked great on camera but would never survive a real fight. That is what Danny told himself. That is what he told anyone who would listen at the bars near his apartment. "Seagal is a fraud," he would say. "Put him in a ring with me and I will prove it in 30 seconds. Nobody took him seriously. Why would they? Danny was a nobody complaining about a somebody. That is the oldest story in Hollywood. But then something happened that pushed Danny right to the edge. The premiere of Under Siege. November 1992. That movie turned Seagal from a star into a phenomenon. It made over $100 million. Seagal was everywhere. Magazine covers, talk shows, and the after party. Now, Danny was not invited to that party. Of course he was not. But his old manager, the one who had promised him Hollywood, still had connections. He got Danny a +1 through a friend of a catering company. A backdoor entry. Danny showed up in a borrowed suit that did not fit right across the shoulders. He told himself he was just going to network. Meet some producers. Hand out his headshot. That is what he said. But the moment he walked through those doors and saw that mansion, the champagne towers, the laughter, the beautiful people, and right there in the center of the biggest room, Steven Seagal, holding a glass, smiling, surrounded by 3 producers who were hanging on every word he said. Something inside Danny cracked. It was not jealousy. Not exactly. It was something worse. It was the feeling that the world had made a terrible mistake. That the wrong man was standing in the spotlight. And that if Danny could just prove it, right here, right now, in front of the people who mattered, everything would change. He grabbed a drink from a passing tray. Then another. Then a third. Each one made the idea louder. Each one made it feel less like madness and more like destiny. By midnight, Danny Cordero had made his decision. He was going to expose Steven Seagal in front of the most powerful room in Hollywood. And he was going to do it with his fists. That decision would cost him everything. Danny set his empty glass on a table and started walking. Straight through the crowd. Straight toward Seagal. People moved out of his way. Not because they knew what was coming, but because something about the way Danny moved told them to step aside. His jaw was tight. His hands were already half closed into fists. And his eyes were locked on one man. Now get this. Seagal saw him coming. I want you to understand that. He was mid-sentence with a producer named Arthur Greenwald, talking about international distribution for the sequel. But his eyes shifted. Just for a second. He clocked Danny crossing the room. And he did not move. Did not tense up. Did not excuse himself. He just kept talking. Like a man who had seen trouble walk toward him before and knew exactly how long he had before it arrived. Danny stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to smell the cologne. Close enough for the producers to feel the shift in the air. One of them, a woman in a black dress, took a half step back. She knew. Everyone near that circle knew something was about to happen. Danny reached out and slapped the champagne glass out of Seagal's hand. It shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the music, through the chatter, through everything. The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, starting from the people closest and spreading outward until there was nothing. Just silence. And Danny's voice. This guy is a fraud. He said it loud enough for 50 people to hear. He has never been in a real fight in his life. Every move he knows is choreographed. Every takedown he has ever done was scripted. Danny pointed his finger right at Seagal's chest. I am a real fighter. And I am going to prove it right now. Seagal looked at him. That is all he did for a moment. Just looked. His face did not change. His breathing did not change. And that, believe me, that should have been Danny's warning. Because a man who does not flinch when you threaten him in front of 100 people is not a man who is afraid. He is a man who is deciding. Danny did not wait for a response. He stepped back, loaded his hips, and threw a spinning heel kick aimed directly at Seagal's temple. It was fast. I will give him that. His MMA training had not left his body even if it had left his record. That kick would have knocked out most men in the room. But Seagal was not most men. He moved his head 2 inches to the left. The kick sailed past his ear. And then his hands moved. One hand caught Danny's ankle. The other locked behind the knee. In a single motion. One fluid, mechanical twist. The ankle snapped. The sound was like a branch breaking. Danny's mouth opened, but the scream had not arrived yet. Because before his brain could process the first break, Seagal had already transitioned. He seized Danny's right arm, pulled it straight, drove his palm against the elbow joint from the wrong side. The second crack was worse than the first. Louder, wetter. 2 guests near the fireplace turned and vomited into their champagne glasses. A woman screamed. For seconds, start to finish. Danny hit the marble floor. He was screaming now, both hands useless, one ankle pointing the wrong direction. Seagal stood over him for exactly 1 second. Then he turned, reached for a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray, took a sip, and turned back to Arthur Greenwald. So, Seagal said, about the sequel. The room stayed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Danny Cordero sobbing on the marble floor. And for a long, strange moment, it almost felt like the night could still recover. Like this was just a scene from a movie and someone would yell cut. But nobody yelled cut. Instead, a small red light appeared. Camera. Someone in the back of the room had been recording the entire thing. And now that person stepped forward. His name was Martin Hale, a freelance entertainment journalist who had snuck into the party the same way Danny had, through the catering back door. And the footage on his camera was about to change the nature of this night completely. See, up until this moment the story was simple. A drunk nobody attacked a movie star. The movie star defended himself. End of story. Self-defense. Clean. But Martin Hale's camera had captured something else. Something that happened before Danny threw that kick. Something most people in the room had missed because they were not looking in the right direction at the right time. Captured Seagal's face. The moment Danny started walking toward him. And on that face there was no surprise. No concern. There was a smile. Small. Brief. Gone in half a second. But the camera caught it. Steven Seagal had seen Danny coming. And he had welcomed it. Now here is the thing. That changes everything. Because self-defense means you had no choice. It means you responded to a threat you did not want. But if a man smiles before the threat arrives, if a man positions his body so the attacker has a clear path, if a man chooses not to step away when he has every opportunity to do so, that is not self-defense. That is an invitation. Martin Hale knew what he had. He approached Arthur Greenwald first. Showed him the footage on the tiny camera screen. Greenwald's face went pale. He grabbed Seagal by the elbow and pulled him into a side room. A study with dark wood walls and a closed door. The conversation that happened in that room. I am going to tell you what 3 different people later claimed they heard through that door. Greenwald said, "Steven, there is a man with a camera. He has you smiling before the attack. Do you understand what that means?" Seagal, according to one account, said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "The man attacked me. I defended myself. That is all anyone needs to know." Greenwald shook his head. That is not all anyone needs to know if this footage hits the evening news. They will say you baited him. They will say you wanted this to happen. They will say you broke a man's bones for sport. And that, believe me, was the moment Steven Seagal realized the 4 seconds that made him feel untouchable were now the 4 seconds that could destroy him. Meanwhile, out in the main room, things were getting worse. Paramedics had arrived. Danny Cordero was on a stretcher. His ankle was wrapped in a temporary splint, but the damage was beyond field treatment. His elbow had already started to swell to twice its normal size. He was moaning, barely conscious. But as they wheeled him toward the front door, he said something. Just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. He said, "He wanted me to do it. He set me up." Now, was that true? Was Danny Cordero right? Or was that the excuse of a drunk, broken man who had just made the worst decision of his life? That is the question that Martin Hale's camera footage was about to force every single person in that room to answer. 2 phone calls were made within the next 10 minutes. The first was from Greenwald to Seagal's lawyer. The second was from Martin Hale to his editor at a tabloid magazine. Both calls were short. Both calls were urgent. And both calls set in motion chains of events that would collide by morning. Seagal's lawyer arrived at the mansion within 40 minutes. Her name was Patricia Dunn. She was known in Hollywood for one thing, making problems disappear. She walked through the party like she owned the house, spoke to no one, went straight to the study where Seagal and Greenwald were waiting. She closed the door behind her and the first thing she said was, "Where's the man with the camera?" But Martin Hale was already gone. He had left through the same back door he came in. And his camera went with him. Patricia Dunn made 3 more calls from that study. 1 to the catering company, 1 to the mansion's private security firm, and 1 to a contact at the Los Angeles Police Department. Within an hour, she had the names of every person who had entered through the back door that night. She had the catering company's guest edition records. And she had a description of Martin Hale from 2 different security guards. But she did not have the tape. And now the clock was running. Because if that footage aired before Seagal's team could control the narrative, the story would not be about a movie star defending himself at a party. It would be about a movie star who baited a drunk man into a fight and then shattered his bones while smiling. In Hollywood, the truth does not matter nearly as much as the footage. And the footage, right now, was in the hands of a man driving down Mulholland Drive with his windows open and his heart pounding. Seagal stood in that study. He had not sat down once. His champagne glass was still in his hand, still full. He looked at Patricia Dunn, and he said 5 words that she would later describe as the calmest thing she had ever heard a man say while his career was on fire. Find him before sunrise. They found him at 4 a.m. Not Patricia Dunn's people. Seagal himself. Now here is how that happened. Patricia was working the phones, pulling strings, calling in favors from people who owed her. But Seagal was not a man who waited for other people to solve his problems. He never had been. While Patricia made her calls, Seagal slipped out of the study, walked through the remains of the party, and got into his black Mercedes. Alone. No driver. No bodyguard. Just him and the address of the tabloid magazine that Martin Hale freelanced for. He got that address from a producer's assistant who owed him a favor. It took one phone call and 90 seconds. Seagal drove down the hill, through the empty streets of Hollywood at 3 a.m., past the closed shops and the flickering signs. He did not speed. He did not rush. He drove like a man going to a business meeting, because in his mind that is exactly what this was. Martin Hale was not at the magazine office, but the night security guard at the building recognized Seagal's face immediately. Everybody did in 1992. Seagal asked one question. The freelancer, Martin Hale, where does he develop his film? The security guard hesitated, but only for a moment, because when Steven Seagal asks you a question at 3 a.m. with that look in his eyes, you answer it. The guard gave him the name of a 24-hour photo lab on Sunset Boulevard. A small place, run by a Korean couple who catered to journalists who needed fast developing at odd hours. Seagal arrived at the photo lab at 3:47 a.m., and there, through the glass window, he could see Martin Hale, sitting on a plastic chair, waiting for his film to develop, his camera bag on his lap, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. The man who held Seagal's future in a roll of film did not even see the black Mercedes park across the street. Seagal sat in his car for 6 minutes. He watched Hale through the window, and in those 6 minutes something shifted. I am going to tell you what Seagal later told Arthur Greenwald about those 6 minutes. He said, I sat in that car and I thought about every fight I have ever been in, every real one, every one on camera, and I realized something. The fights I won with my hands were never the ones that mattered. The ones that mattered were the ones I won without throwing a single strike. At 3:53 a.m., Seagal got out of his car, crossed the street, opened the door to the photo lab. The little bell above the door rang. Martin Hale looked up, and the color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Now get this. Hale stood up so fast the chair fell over behind him. He grabbed his camera bag and held it against his chest like a shield. His mouth opened but no words came out. Because what do you say when the man whose career you are about to destroy walks into the room at 4 in the morning? Alone, calm, looking right through you. Seagal did not raise his voice. He did not make a fist. He pulled up a second plastic chair, sat down across from Hale and said, Sit down, Martin. Hale did not sit down. He backed up until he hit the counter. The Korean woman behind the register stepped quietly into the back room. It was just the two of them now. I know what you have, Seagal said. I know what it looks like, and I know what you think it means. He paused. But you were not there for the first part of the night. You did not see that man follow me from room to room for 2 hours. You did not hear him tell 3 different people what he was going to do. You did not see him throw a drink at a woman who asked him to calm down. Seagal leaned forward. Your camera caught 4 seconds, Martin. But the story is 4 hours long. Hale's hands were shaking. But he was a journalist. And journalists ask questions even when they are afraid. He said, Then why were you smiling? Seagal looked at him for a long time. Then he said something that Martin Hale would repeat in interviews for the next 20 years. He said, Because I have spent my entire life training for a moment I hoped would never come. And when it finally came, I was ready. That is not cruelty, Martin. That is relief. The room was silent. The developing machine hummed in the back. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. And Martin Hale made his decision. He opened his camera bag, took out the roll of undeveloped film, and set it on the counter between them. I want an exclusive interview, Hale said. Your side of the story, on the record, in your own words. Seagal picked up the film, held it for a moment, then nodded. You will have it by Monday. They shook hands. And Steven Seagal walked out of that photo lab at 4:12 a.m. carrying the only evidence that could have ended his career. The bell above the door rang one more time. And then it was quiet. If you have made it this far into the story, I appreciate you. Take a moment. Hit subscribe. Leave a like. Because this story is not over yet. There is still the matter of Danny Cordero. And what happened to him is something nobody expected. Danny Cordero woke up in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 6 a.m. that same morning. His right ankle had been surgically pinned with 3 titanium screws. His left elbow had been reconstructed with a metal plate and 8 stitches inside the joint. The surgeon told him he would walk again, but not the same. He would use his arm again, but never fully extend it. The fighting career was over. That part was obvious. But what was not obvious, what nobody in that hospital room could have predicted, was what Danny Cordero would do next. For the first 3 days, Danny said nothing. His mother flew in from New Jersey. His former manager came once, stood at the foot of the bed for 10 minutes, and left without saying a word. A detective from the LAPD came by on the second day with a notepad and asked Danny if he wanted to press charges. Danny looked at the ceiling and said, "For what? I threw the first kick." The detective closed his notepad and left. On the 4th day, Danny asked for a pen and a piece of paper. His mother thought he was going to write a letter, maybe to a lawyer, maybe to the press. But Danny did not write a letter. He wrote a list. Every fight he had ever been in, professional and otherwise, every man he had ever hurt, every bone he had broken that belonged to someone else. 14 professional fights, 11 finishes, and at least a dozen street fights he had never told anyone about. Bar fights, parking lot fights, one fight outside a gas station in Reno that put a man in the hospital for 6 weeks. Danny looked at that list for a long time. Then he folded it up and put it under his pillow. His mother asked him what it was. He said, "A receipt." Now here is where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Not the press. Not the Hollywood gossip columns. Not even Seagal himself. 6 weeks after the incident, Danny Cordero was released from the hospital. He moved back to New Jersey, into his mother's house, into his old bedroom with the trophies on the shelf and the fight posters on the wall. He could barely walk. His arm was in a sling, and he had exactly $400 in his bank account. Everything he had taken to Hollywood was gone. The apartment, the headshots, the borrowed suit, all of it. For 2 months, Danny did nothing. He sat in that bedroom and he stared at the ceiling. His mother brought him food. His old friends came by. Some of them wanted to talk about what happened. Some of them wanted to talk about suing Seagal. Some of them wanted to talk about revenge. Danny listened to all of them, and then he asked them to leave. In February of 1993, Danny enrolled in a community college in Newark. He signed up for 2 classes, English Composition and Introduction to Psychology. He told his mother it was just to pass the time. But it was not just to pass the time. Something had changed inside Danny Cordero on that marble floor. Something that went deeper than the bones that were broken. See, Danny had spent his entire adult life believing that strength was the only currency that mattered. That if you could beat a man in a fight, you were better than him. That toughness was the measure of a man. And on that night in Hollywood, he had met a man who was tougher than him. Faster, more skilled, more controlled. And instead of accepting that, Danny had convinced himself that the world was unfair. That Seagal was a fraud. That the system was broken. But lying on that marble floor with 2 shattered limbs, looking up at a man who had already moved on to his next conversation, Danny finally understood something. He was not angry at Seagal. He had never been angry at Seagal. He was angry at himself. For wasting 2 years chasing something he did not even want. For moving to a city that did not need him. For standing in a room full of strangers and deciding that violence was the only way to prove he mattered. That list he wrote in the hospital. The one with every fight. Every man he had hurt. That was not a receipt for what the world had done to him. It was a receipt for what he had done to the world. Danny finished his associate degree in 1995. He transferred to Rutgers, studied social work, graduated in 1998 with honors. His professors said he had something most students did not have. He had lived through the thing he was studying. He did not just understand anger from a textbook. He understood it from the inside, from the place where it starts as a whisper and ends as a broken ankle on a marble floor. By 2001, Danny Cordero was working at a youth rehabilitation center in Trenton, New Jersey. He specialized in anger management for young men who reminded him of himself. Young men who believed that their fists were the most important thing about them. Young men who were one bad decision away from losing everything. He did not lecture them. He did not quote psychology books at them. He sat across from them in a small office with a metal desk and a window that faced a parking lot. And he told them his story, the real one, every part of it. He told them about the borrowed suit, about the champagne glass shattering on the floor, about the spinning kick that never landed, about the sound his own ankle made when it broke. He told them about lying on that marble floor, staring at the ceiling of a mansion he would never be invited to again, while a man he had called a fraud went back to his conversation without a second glance. And every single time he told that story, the room got quiet, because those boys knew he was not making it up. They could see it in his limp. They could see it in the arm that would not straighten. The proof was right there in front of them. One boy, 16 years old, had been arrested for assaulting a man outside a convenience store. He sat in Danny's office on his first day and said, "Why should I listen to you?" Danny rolled up his sleeve and showed the boy the scar on his elbow, the surgical line, the bumps of the metal plate underneath the skin. And he said, "Because I know exactly what happens when you think your fists are the answer. And I am living with it every single day." That boy finished the program, got his GED. Last anyone heard, he was working construction in Philadelphia. He never went back to jail. Danny helped over 200 young men through that program over the next decade. Not all of them made it. Some went back to the streets. Some ended up in prison. But many of them did not. And the ones who made it always said the same thing, that it was Danny's story that changed them. Not the lesson, the story, because it was real. And because the man telling it was not pretending to have all the answers. He was just honest about what happens when you let rage make your choices. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. His left arm never fully straightened. But every morning, Danny Cordero put on a clean shirt, drove to that center, and sat across from boys who were exactly where he had been. And he told them the truth. Not the Hollywood version. Not the version where the hero wins. The real version, where the man who throws the first punch loses everything. And the man who does not throw it walks away whole. Now, what about Seagal? The interview with Martin Hale ran the following Thursday. A full-page exclusive in a mid-tier entertainment magazine. Seagal told his side. Calmly, clearly. He described Danny as a disturbed individual who had been harassing guests all evening. He described his own response as instinctive. Trained muscle memory. Nothing personal. The article ran with a photo of Seagal on set. Confident. Composed. The headline read something like, "Seagal speaks. What really happened at the after-party?" It sold well for 1 week. And then it disappeared. In 1992, there was no internet to keep a scandal alive. No social media. No viral videos. No comment sections. No hashtags. A story lived for as long as people talked about it, and then it died. The tape was never developed. Martin Hale kept the interview as the centerpiece of his portfolio for years. It was the biggest story he ever got. But the footage that started it all, the 4 seconds on film, that stayed in a drawer in Seagal's home office. Undeveloped, unseen. A secret shared by 2 men who shook hands in a photo lab at 4 a.m. Seagal went on to make the sequel, Under Siege 2. His career continued. Bigger budgets. More movies. More magazine covers. He became one of the highest-paid action stars of the decade. He trained with law enforcement. He appeared on talk shows. He never slowed down. He never spoke about Danny Cordero publicly. Not once. Not in any interview. Not in any biography. Not in any behind-the-scenes documentary. As far as Steven Seagal was concerned, that night at the party was 4 seconds of his life that did not deserve a footnote. And maybe he was right. Maybe for a man like Seagal, 4 seconds was nothing. A blink, a reflex, a Tuesday. But here is what I think about when I remember this story. And believe me, I have thought about it many times. 2 men walked into that party in 1992. Both of them believed they were the toughest man in the room. One of them proved it in 4 seconds. The other one spent the next 10 years proving something harder. That strength is not about what you can break. It is about what you can build after you have been broken. Danny Cordero never contacted Steven Seagal. Never wrote him a letter. Never asked for an apology. He did not need one. Because the man who walked out of that hospital in a wheelchair was not the same man who walked into that party in a borrowed suit. And the man who sat across from those boys in Trenton every morning, telling them the truth about what happens when you let your fists make your decisions. That man was stronger than either of them had ever been at that party. Some men mistake silence for weakness. Danny Cordero used to be one of those men. He is not anymore. And that, believe me, that is the real story.